Have you ever felt undervalued or unappreciated at work or in your family? How did you handle the situation? Ellen never thought that her 20 years of dedication at Carter and Phillips Consulting would end like this. She had poured her entire career into the company, working tirelessly, handling crises, and even sacrificing her personal moments to make sure everything went smoothly. But it turned out, to him, she was just a pawn. A name on the payroll that could be scratched off whenever he pleased. The bitter truth hit that evening, when Ellen opened a message from Liam, a young employee she had mentored. She couldn't believe her eyes. The message was accompanied by a video, less than 30 seconds long, but enough to change everything. Ellen is useless. She knows nothing. Next month, we'll get rid of her, mark my words. It was Daniel Carter, the man Ellen had once trusted as a leader, despite his many flaws. But what hurt her more than his words was the reaction of those around him. The people she had worked with for decades, the people she had helped, now stood in silence, each time hearing Daniel's mocking tone grow more infuriating. She had spent her career propping him up, covering for his incompetence, only for him to treat her like a worthless pawn. Ellen couldn't believe that after everything she had done, this was how they saw her. A joke. Someone who was about to be kicked out without even knowing. That night, Ellen couldn't sleep, humiliation, and something else, something stronger. It wasn't despair, it was determination. If Daniel thought she would walk into the trap unaware, he had made a fatal mistake. He didn't realize that Ellen, the one he looked down on, was the one who had kept the company afloat for 20 years. And now, she would show him what it meant to lose everything. The next morning, as usual, Ellen walked into the office at 7:55 a.m. No one knew that today, the game had officially begun. Preparing for revenge, when the betrayed be the one in power, Ellen entered the office on Monday morning, her face calm and composed. No one in the company, including Daniel, knew that she held all the cards. His words at the party, his mockery, his betrayal, everything was burned into her memory. But instead of letting anger take over, she decided to channel it into motivation. She wouldn't react immediately. She wouldn't show any signs. Instead, she would play this game her way. For the next 4 weeks, Ellen remained the model employee everyone knew. She showed no hint of doubt about what was coming. She still participated in meetings with enthusiasm, took on extra work, and still greeted Daniel with a polite smile as she passed him in the hall. But beneath that exterior, she was quietly gathering everything she needed. She started by collecting important documents, emails, contracts, financial reports, things most people overlooked, but that were incredibly valuable. She reviewed the deals Daniel had made, taking note of the financial gaps within the company, and most importantly, the list of loyal clients. Ellen knew exactly who trusted Carter and Phillips, and who was only staying because of her presence. Then, she laid the foundation for her next move. She reached out to the company's largest clients, those she had built solid relationships with over the years. It didn't take long for her to realize that they weren't loyal to Daniel. They were loyal to Ellen. But she wasn't just targeting clients. She also started preparing a legal strategy, consulting with a top lawyer to ensure every move she made was legally sound. She wanted to make sure that when she left, she wouldn't leave any loopholes for Daniel to come after her. And finally, she approached Daniel's rival, Sterling and Company. She knew they had been eyeing Carter and Phillips for a while, looking for opportunities to expand their market share. And now, she was the opportunity they needed. They weren't just ready to welcome her, they wanted her to help them undermine Carter and Phillips. 4 weeks passed quickly. Daniel still walked around, smug in the belief that he would soon be able to fire Ellen without facing any opposition. She wasn't just leaving, she was about to take everything that was most important to his company. The day of the firing was drawing closer. Ellen knew it was coming, but she still pretended as if she didn't. She walked into the office on time, as usual, her face calm, her professional smile in place. Her colleagues silently observed her. They knew. They all knew. But no one said a word to her. At 3 p.m., Denise from HR walked into Daniel's office. She didn't look at Ellen, but Ellen already knew what was coming. A minute later, her phone lit up. "Daniel Carter, please come to my office at 3:30. Ellen put her phone down, took a deep breath, and stood up. When she entered the office, Daniel was sitting behind his desk, trying to appear professional, but there was something different in his eyes: hesitation, unease, maybe even fear. Denise sat across from him, a folder neatly placed on the desk. "Ellen, please have a seat," Daniel said, trying to keep his voice calm. Ellen sat down, her gaze steady. "Thank you." Daniel began his prepared speech. He talked about company restructuring, the inevitable changes in the industry, and the difficult decisions the leadership had to make. Finally, he concluded in the fake tone of someone pretending to feel regret. "We truly appreciate your dedication over the last 20 years. However, unfortunately, your position is being eliminated. To ensure a smooth transition, we'd like to offer you a generous severance package." Denise pushed the folder toward Ellen. She didn't touch it. She looked at Daniel, studying him as he waited to see her reaction. What did he expect? Anger? Begging? A look of shock at the sudden firing? But Ellen simply smiled. "I understand," she said, her voice so calm it made Daniel feel slightly uneasy. He blinked, then cleared his throat. "Good. We will also need to retrieve the company laptop and your keycard before you leave the building." Ellen nodded. "Of course." Then she tilted her head, her gaze sharper now. "Just to confirm, this decision is final, right?" Daniel hesitated for a second. He didn't expect this question. But then he regained his composure and nodded. "Of course," Ellen smiled. "Perfect." She stood up, picked up the folder, but didn't open it. She looked directly at Daniel and spoke softly. "I'll start clearing my desk now." Daniel nodded, relieved, thinking everything was done. He had no idea that this moment was when he unknowingly signed his own doom. Because Ellen wasn't just leaving. She was about to burn everything he once held as untouchable. Daniel Carter's downfall, when the betrayer loses everything. Ellen walked out of Daniel's office with a small smile on her face, a smile no one in the company could understand. To those around her, she was just an employee who had been fired, someone about to pack her things and leave in silence. But in reality, it was the exact opposite. She wasn't the loser, she was the one who had just ended Daniel Carter's career. Back at her desk, Ellen took the final steps to complete her plan. Nothing illegal, nothing shady, just the documents she had once had full access to, until today. But the real killer blow came from a single email. A brief, but powerful message. "To Richard, I want to thank you for our collaboration over the years. I'd like to inform you that I'll be leaving Carter and Phillips Consulting today. If you're interested in continuing to work together in the future, I would be happy to discuss potential opportunities. Best regards, Ellen." Richard Miller was no ordinary client. He was the most important client the company had, contributing to 40% of its annual revenue. And Ellen knew one thing for sure. Richard wasn't loyal to Carter and Phillips, he was loyal to her. She clicked send. Everything was set. Ellen cleared her desk and politely bid farewell to her colleagues with a smile. Not a single person, not even Daniel, realized that the real storm had just begun. The next day, the nightmare begins. The next morning, Ellen woke up in peace, a feeling she hadn't had in 20 years. But at Carter and Phillips, the atmosphere was the exact opposite. Chaos. Her phone started buzzing nonstop. The first message came from Liam. "Ellen, what did you do? The office is in chaos. Richard Miller just canceled the contract. Daniel is losing his mind." Ellen smiled softly, faster than she expected. Richard didn't need to think twice. As soon as he knew Ellen was leaving, he had no reason to stay. 40% of the company's revenue vanished in one night. And that was just the beginning. Within hours, 3 other major clients also announced they were terminating their contracts. The competitors were ready and eager to welcome these disgruntled clients. Sterling and Company, where Ellen had just joined, wasted no time. They quickly approached these clients, offering enticing deals. Daniel Carter had no idea what had just happened. At first, he tried to control the situation. He called Richard, trying to persuade him to stay. But the response he got was a cold refusal. "I don't trust a company that doesn't know how to value its talent." Daniel panicked. He tried to calm the board, reassure the investors. But the truth was too clear. Carter and Phillips was no longer a strong company. It was collapsing right in front of him. That afternoon, Ellen received a call from an unknown number. She picked up. "Ellen." Daniel's tense voice crackled through the line. She smiled. Daniel, it's a surprise to get a call from you. What have you done? His voice was filled with anger, but also tinged with panic. I haven't done anything, Ellen replied calmly. I just sent a few emails as a polite way to say goodbye to the people I've worked with. Daniel ground his teeth. You think you can ruin me? You have no idea who you're dealing with. Ellen chuckled softly. She hung up, because for her, the game was over. But for Daniel, it had only just begun. Ellen's rise, when the undervalued takes control. Ellen placed her phone down, a small smile appearing on her face. Daniel Carter had called in desperation, trying to turn the situation around, but he had no idea that everything was already beyond his control. The fall of Carter and Phillips had begun, and nothing could stop it now. For 20 years, Ellen had always been the one behind the scenes, ensuring the company ran smoothly. Daniel may have held the title of CEO, but she was the one maintaining all the key relationships. He had made a fatal mistake, underestimating her value. But Ellen was not the type to simply walk away quietly. She would leave in a way that no one would ever forget. When she left Carter and Phillips, she wasn't just looking for a new job. She had planned to take control of the position she truly deserved. And that began with a meeting with Nathan Pierce, the CEO of Sterling and Company, Carter and Phillips' biggest competitor. The turning point. The deal that changed everything. That afternoon, Ellen walked into Sterling and Company's office. No longer a fired employee, no longer someone dismissed and disregarded. Today, she was the one with the power. Nathan Pierce greeted her with a firm handshake, his eyes filled with excitement. I have to say, I've been looking forward to this meeting. Ellen simply smiled. She wasn't in a rush, she knew she was in control. She took out a folder and gently pushed it toward Nathan. Here's the list of Carter and Phillips' major clients, the ones whose contracts are about to expire, the ones who no longer trust Daniel Carter. Nathan flipped through the pages, his eyes lighting up as he realized the value of this information. Top companies, lucrative contracts, all waiting for a better option. And Ellen was the key to unlocking that door. I don't just want a job, Ellen said, her voice steady. I want a position that I deserve. I want the power to make decisions. And more importantly, I want to make sure that Carter and Phillips never stands up again. Nathan laughed, shaking his head in admiration. Ellen, I like the way you think. Welcome to Sterling and Company. The deal was signed that same day. But Ellen didn't just land a new job. She secured a senior partner position, control over important accounts, and most importantly, the opportunity to destroy Carter and Phillips once and for all. The complete collapse of Daniel Carter. On Monday morning, as Sterling and Company welcomed new clients, Carter and Phillips was in complete chaos. Liam, the only one in the company still in contact with Ellen, sent a message. Ellen, you won't believe it. 3 major clients just left. The board is panicking. Daniel looks like he's about to destroy the office. Ellen took a sip of coffee, calm as ever. Everything was going exactly as planned. Then, the biggest news came. Carter and Phillips' stock plummeted. The board convened an emergency meeting, and just 1 week later, they made the inevitable decision to fire Daniel Carter. This time, he was the one who had to leave in disgrace. Ellen read the headline in the financial news. Daniel Carter ousted as CEO, Carter and Phillips on the verge of collapse. She set the paper down, exhaling in relief. It was over. She hadn't just left. She had won. The price of betrayal. When the betrayer begs for mercy. Ellen sat in her new office at Sterling and Company, feeling the peace and control she had never experienced before. In front of her was a stack of files with valuable contracts, clients she had brought with her from Carter and Phillips. Everything was going according to plan. Her old company was collapsing, the board had fired Daniel Carter, and his reputation was completely ruined. But there was one thing Ellen hadn't anticipated. That afternoon, her assistant knocked on the door, looking somewhat uncomfortable. Ellen, you have a visitor. Ellen raised an eyebrow. Who is it? Her assistant hesitated before answering. Daniel Carter. Ellen sat up straight, the corners of her lips curling into a slight smirk. She wasn't surprised. When someone like Daniel loses everything, they'll try to cling to whatever's left. And today, he had chosen to come to her. The one he once mocked, the one he once looked down on, the one he thought would never live without his company. She took a deep breath and gestured to her assistant. Send him in. The door opened and Daniel walked in. But he was no longer the arrogant man she once knew. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his tie undone, his face gaunt from lack of sleep. For the first time in her life, he looked small. Ellen didn't say anything immediately. She simply stared at him, letting the silence weigh heavily in the room. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. Ellen, his voice was hoarse, no longer confident. You've won, I admit it. Ellen tilted her head, her gaze still calm. Oh? I didn't think this was a competition, Daniel. He scoffed, but it wasn't the smug smile from before. It was the smile of a man who had lost everything. You know what I mean. Ellen crossed her arms, leaning back in her chair. So you're here to do what? Beg for my help? Daniel clenched his fists, clearly swallowing his pride. I need a job. In that moment, Ellen almost laughed. Daniel Carter, the man who had once seen her as useless, the man who had mocked her in front of a crowd, now standing before her begging for a chance. She stood up and walked toward him. Daniel, I think you're mistaken. He frowned. Mistaken about what? Ellen smiled, but her eyes were cold. You don't need a job, you need a lesson. Daniel froze. He knew exactly what she meant. He had once had it all: power, position, clients, loyal customers, but his own arrogance had destroyed it all. And Ellen wasn't the one to save him from the consequences of his mistakes. She stepped back, gesturing toward the door. I think our conversation is over. Good luck, Daniel. Daniel stood there for a few seconds, as if he wanted to argue, to turn the situation around. But then he realized there was nothing left to say. He turned and walked out the door, the sound of it closing echoing, just like the door to his career had shut forever. Ellen exhaled, turning back to her desk. She looked out the window, the vast city stretching out before her, and smiled. Daniel Carter was gone from her life, and now, Ellen was truly the one who had won. The complete collapse of Daniel. When the power is no longer his, on Monday morning, Ellen walked into the Sterling and Company office, sipping a hot coffee and feeling the energy in the new workspace. No more tension from covering up Daniel's mistakes, no more late nights fixing his failures. Now, she was in a position she truly deserved, a place where she could control the game, rather than being caught up in it. But while Ellen enjoyed her newfound freedom, at Carter & Phillips, a true nightmare was unfolding. Her phone buzzed with a message from Liam. You won't believe this. The board is holding an emergency meeting. The investors are panicking from losing so many clients. Daniel is about to be kicked out. Ellen smiled and typed a brief reply, on schedule. She didn't have to wait long to witness the results. An hour later, financial news websites exploded with sensational headlines. Carter & Phillips facing severe crisis, CEO Daniel Carter under investigation by the board. Ellen's departure causes mass client exodus. The firm loses millions in just 1 week. Ellen took another sip of her coffee, savoring every word like a beautiful melody. She didn't need to destroy Daniel herself. His own arrogance and incompetence had done that for him. The final battle, overthrown. At 3 p.m., Liam sent another message, this time even more frantic. Daniel is arguing with the board during the meeting. They're demanding he resign immediately. Ellen leaned back in her chair, imagining Daniel, once firmly planted in his CEO seat, now surrounded by angry, disappointed eyes. At the Carter & Phillips headquarters, Daniel had nowhere to turn. The investors had run out of patience, and the board was tired of his empty promises. With 40% of revenue gone, and stock prices plummeting, no one wanted to keep a failing CEO in charge. Daniel, the company has suffered enough losses. We can't let you continue leading it into the ground, one of the board members declared, his voice as cold as ice. Daniel tried to defend himself, but his words carried no weight anymore. In the end, he could only sit there, watching his power slip away. Effective immediately, Daniel Carter is removed as CEO of Carter & Phillips. We will appoint a new leadership team to restore the company's reputation. The announcement rang out, marking the end of Daniel Carter's reign. Ellen, the one who smiled last. That evening, Ellen received an email from Liam. Daniel's been kicked out. He left the building with a pale face. People are saying no one will hire him again. Ellen stared at the screen for a moment, then smiled gently. The game was over. Daniel had once believed he was invincible, that he could control everything. But he had forgotten one important thing: loyalty cannot be forced, and injustice cannot last forever. Now Ellen was the one standing at the top. No more underestimation, no more disrespect. She was the true winner. The end of an empire, when Daniel realizes the truth too late. On Friday morning, Ellen sat in her new office at Sterling and Company, her eyes on the computer screen as the latest news about Carter and Phillips appeared. She took a sip of coffee, relaxing and enjoying the moment she had predicted all along. Daniel Carter was no longer CEO. His company was sinking, and no one wanted to save it. Her phone buzzed. It was another message from Liam, the only person at Carter and Phillips still keeping her updated. "Ellen, you won't believe this. The board didn't just fire Daniel. They're getting ready to sue him for mismanagement. The office is in chaos. Employees are leaving in droves." Ellen raised her eyebrows and smiled. Perfect. She didn't have to wait long to see the next stage of the collapse. Financial news outlets quickly updated the situation. Ellen's departure triggers domino effect. Company faces imminent bankruptcy. And now with her gone, the company was nothing but an empty shell. The final call. When Daniel begs for help. At 2:30 p.m., Ellen's phone buzzed with an unknown number. She had expected this. "Ellen?" A tired voice came through. "We need to talk." Ellen smiled slightly. "Daniel, I must say I'm surprised to hear from you." Daniel sighed. "You won, I admit it, but I think we could find a way to work together instead of continuing to tear each other apart." Ellen chuckled softly. "Tear each other apart, Daniel? I've never done that. I simply left, and your company collapsed." On the other end, Daniel was silent for a few seconds. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "I need another chance. Do you think Sterling and Company might have a place for me?" Ellen almost laughed. Daniel Carter, the man who had once mocked her, the man who had thought she was useless, was now begging for a job? She took a deep breath, then replied, her voice calm but cold. "Daniel, do you think I could ever trust you again?" He fell silent. Ellen continued. "You had every opportunity in the world, but you destroyed them. Now, you only have one path left. Learn to take responsibility for your mistakes." Daniel seemed to want to argue, but then he sighed. "So is this how everything ends?" Ellen tilted her head, a faint smile on her lips. "No, Daniel, this is how you end it." She hung up the phone, leaving him with the painful truth he had created for himself. Ellen, the true winner. As the sunlight faded outside her window, Ellen stood up, fully soaking in this moment. Daniel had lost everything. But Ellen? She was just getting started. The lesson from Ellen's story. The value of self-respect and wisdom in life. Ellen's story isn't just about a dramatic revenge. It's filled with profound lessons that can be applied to anyone who has given their all but hasn't been appreciated. First, loyalty only matters when it's placed in the right place. Whether in work or life, we shouldn't stay tied to people who don't value us. Sometimes, knowing when to walk away is the best way to protect our honor and dignity. Second, intelligence and preparation are the strongest weapons. Ellen didn't act impulsively when betrayed. She carefully planned, turning the situation from weak to strong. This reminds us that in any circumstance, patience and strategy always lead to better results than rash actions or fleeting emotions. Lastly, true value lies within ourselves. For those who have been undervalued or overlooked in their families, work, or society, this is a reminder. We don't need to prove our worth to those who aren't deserving of it. Invest in yourself, and success will speak for itself. No matter what age you are, remember that you are never too old to protect your value and control your future.